Welcome to the Workplace Wellbeing Essential Series. I'm Mari Ryan. I'm the CEO and founder of Advancing Wellness. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to this expert interview where we explore topics that impact employee well-being. My guest today is Nancy Halpern. Nancy is a nationally recognized leadership consultant and pioneer in the field of talent development who diagnoses political dysfunction in organizations. Leveraging thought leadership and intellectual capital from over 20 years of client engagements, Nancy helps companies find solutions to their most intractable problems, office politics. Her client list, cutting across industries and functions, reflects her adaptability and love of business. She has worked with domestically and internationally with organizations such as the World Bank, Credit Suisse, Disney, Bank of America, Guardian, and Novartis, among many others. Nancy's been interviewed by numerous media outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Forbes, Fast Company, and you may even have seen her on TV. Nancy holds an MBA from Yale University, a BA from Brandeis University, and has also studied at Oxford in the UK. Nancy, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here today.
I'm so pleased to be here today. Thank you again for inviting me.
My pleasure. Well, as I think about what makes a great place to work, what comes to mind is a place where people get along, where it's trusting, collaborative, and respectful. And yet we know, and we've probably all worked in places that are just not like that. In reality, office politics makes any place to work probably a really lousy place to work. So I'm curious, is there politics in every organization, in every business?
Absolutely. In fact, I did a survey of leading HR professionals and asked them if they have ever worked for an organization that wasn't political. And 96% of them said, I've never worked for a place that wasn't political.
Oh my gosh, that number is astounding.
Well, Mari, I think part of it is that we think about political in a very narrow way. We think about it in a very Machiavellian, conquest-driven, nasty way. But really, political is anytime people are organized into anything. I mean, there's nothing more political than high school.
Yeah.
It's just natural. It's really just a placeholder, I think, for human dynamics that we're uncomfortable with, and that we don't have a good toolkit or language to speak about and become more comfortable in existing with and really even almost thriving in a positive way.
Right. Well, when you think about that from the thriving perspective, right, and the fact that we don't have language or we don't have ways to put this in containers or to describe it, yet we all know the feeling of it. We all know it exists. I'm curious, to what extent does office politics impact the well-being of both the individual, and then how does it impact the well-being of an organization?
I think on the individual level, the impact is it feels like some invisible enemy or game that's rigged against you and that you cannot win at because it's invisible or because it's a game or because it's sort of, packed up in someone in the organization that you don't like. So for the individual, I think it's very demoralizing. Yeah. And from the organizational level, it's very distracting. I mean, think about both the allure and the danger of gossip. On the one hand, gossip is, well, we all love it, but it's also this black market of information. So it can undercut messaging from management because people put more faith in the gossip as being the real story. And the distraction is, instead of competing with your external competitors, you end up competing with each other, which just slows down the work of the organization, be it a nonprofit or an investment bank.
Right. Well, I would think it's got to be a huge energy drain, both for the organization and for the individuals. You think how much energy is tied up in thinking about what's going on and try to figure out what's going on and who's talking to whom and, what do you believe in terms of the communication? That's got to be so draining for everybody.
And it's such negative energy, right? It's not productive energy. It's not energy that then accomplishes something or you can point to and feel that it's been additive. And it's repeatable energy. It's renewable energy, right? It just keeps renewing itself. So I think it's a terrible drain. And I think it really left unaddressed. I think it really drags down the organization, and it certainly impacts people's performance.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. And in their productivity for sure.
And therefore their well-being, because everybody wants to feel good about their work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's discuss the concept you've created of this political IQ. I love hearing about this. How do you define political IQ?
Well, I define political IQ as being on the shoulders of emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the brilliance of EQ was combining the word emotional with the word intelligence, and those words never went together before. All right. So to be politically intelligent means to be aware of the emotional strategy that happens within groups and teams and therefore organizations, and to do it without judgment. So you know the impact of your own behavior and the impact of other people's, and to be thoughtful and intentional about that. I think the word without judgment is really important, because what happens is when we're dealing with someone who's different than we are, we normally just judge them as a bad actor or as doing something wrong, or we have to convince them versus understanding them. So it's really throwing yourself into the idea of being emotionally strategic.
That's a really interesting concept. And how do you think that if we think about this in the way that if I'm able to practice this, so maybe you can help us understand, the behaviors and things around this, because, some of us might not know exactly how to start to practice this, but how, if I'm able to practice this, does this impact how I show up and maybe even how I feel about my work or the place that I work, and overall, I think even your well-being?
Sure, I can make this very practical, so it's not just a theory. My team and I took about 8 months to comb through about 120 different behaviors. Wow. To find the behaviors that we thought were both positive, right? I don't want to say to people, well, just don't throw that person under the bus. That seems to me an obvious thing, but what's positive, what's practical, and what's learnable? Because I think of this as a leadership capability or a personal skill set. So we went through all those behaviors, came down to about 28 of them. And they're in 4 different, what we call dimensions or categories. The first is, what actions and behaviors do you take that build credibility? And what that means is, how are you earning others' gratitude and goodwill? Because in doing that, you are helping to create a more vibrant organization, and you're feeling pretty good about yourself. The second is, how do you generate support? By influencing others' viewpoints. What steps are you taking in a positive way to be, I hate to use the word, it's so overused, but an influencer internally? Pursuing results doesn't mean, excuse me, at any cost. It means, do you have a well-honed approach to working through challenges and changes to achieve goals? And the last, which is my favorite, which can be exhausting, as you mentioned, but doesn't have to be, is, are you reading the chessboard? Meaning, are you constantly gathering and analyzing information about what's going on? Because, your workplace is dynamic. Things are changing. People are leaving, people are starting, people are getting promoted. So to be really specific, let's just, in read the chessboard, I'll just throw out a couple of behaviors that you can do from the model. One is, identify which battles you're most likely to win. I know a lot of people who kind of tilt at windmills, and they get very morally wrapped up in it. But I think that becomes a set of blinders. I would rather people pick the battles that matter, but also the ones that they can win. Yeah. Otherwise, that's also a very negative energy drain. Right. And just another is to actually seek out potential obstacles. Most people don't want to know about the obstacles to their goals, because that means more work, or they get very defensive. But if you can actually actively search out the obstacles, then you can develop a strategy to overcome them, including getting buy-in from others. So it's a sort of almost like a risk assessment, or I hate to use the word battle plan, because I don't always like military language or metaphors, but that's really what you're doing.
Hmm. So how do we learn these behaviors? So it sounds like this is a whole awareness piece, right? Of not only how do I show up, which is, obviously that self-awareness type of viewpoint, but how do I read other people? How do I guess, read their intentions? Are their intentions always sincere and honest? Help me understand how we start to manifest some of these behaviors for ourselves or be aware of them.
It's really tough to know someone's intention,
Yeah.
right? Other than asking. And you do have to go into it with some level of trust. I think the best place to start, Mari, is by becoming a great observer of others
Mm.
while suspending your judgment about them. One piece of advice that I would give is most of us jump from observation to evaluation very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
He's frowning. Well, the evaluation is he doesn't like what I'm saying. Or, but the truth is, it could be because he has a headache or because he's listening very intently.
Mm-hmm.
And so stay in the observation and generate at least 3 different evaluations for what you're seeing.
Hmm.
And because evaluations are stories that we tell ourselves. So, I think that in an odd way, there's been too much emphasis on self-awareness
Mm-hmm.
and not enough emphasis on awareness of others.
Mm-hmm.
You can't know their intent. You don't really know what they're thinking, but you can observe what they're doing and the impact it has. And I think that's really the beginning of growing your own political IQ.
In situations like that, so let's take the scenario you just described. If you're presenting some concept or in something in a meeting and you notice that this other person is frowning a lot, do you bring that up? Do you say, gee, Nancy, I notice you're frowning, or can I get your take on this? How do you approach that in a way that's going to be comfortable for everybody without kind of calling out somebody?
Right. Well, the first thing I would do is notice if it's a pattern or a one-off.
Okay.
If it's a one-off, I would forget about it.
Okay.
If you see it at the second meeting, I would sort of do a little check mark in your head. Oh, that's interesting. Frank is frowning again. If it's a third time, then it's a thing, right? It's a pattern. So you can always get more, what's the way to describe it? More directional. And I don't want to say confrontational because I don't mean it in an angry way, but you may start by saying, are there any questions about this?
Right.
Or I'll pause. Let me pause. That's a lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
See if anyone has any thoughts. Or make an invitation. Another, even more of an invitation. Does anyone see any soft spots in this? Are there any risks that we haven't included?
Mm-hmm.
So you can almost invite debate. It helps you find the obstacles. And it's also a way for people who aren't comfortable to jump in and say something because you've asked them for it. So they don't have to feel like they're taking you down. I would say if Frank keeps frowning, then I might have a private word to say something like, and use the language of observation. Frank, I've observed during the meetings, you seem to be frowning a lot. Also, by the way, before you do that though, is Frank frowning when everyone speaks?
Yeah.
Or just you?
Yeah.
Because if it's everyone, well, that's just Frank being Frank. I would forget about it. All right. We do personalize a lot of things.
Yes.
And it's good to be sensitive.
Hmm.
But as you know, Mari, that can go to the other extreme where we personalize too much. And so part of being politically intelligent is knowing the difference between this is a business issue or this is a true human issue versus I'm personalizing something.
That's great. Good. That helps clarify a lot. Thank you.
Good. You're welcome.
I'm curious from your perspective about thinking on how our workplaces have changed as a result of the pandemic, where we are living in these virtual worlds, many people working from home. We're not in the physical workspace together. We don't have those conversations on the way to meetings or, over lunch or any of those kinds of things. Has it impacted the political landscape in the workplace?
Well, the honest answer to that is I don't know yet. I haven't been able to collect data. There's a lot of different workplaces. Lots of people are not even returning to their offices if they do till probably the summer of 2021.
Yeah.
What I do see happening is I think people are holding their breath, and there's an enormous amount of self-doubt. And that, for example, do I give feedback right now? People can be very thin-skinned right now. How bad is it? Is there a COVID discount in my performance evaluations this year? Is this the time to really leave this job? Is this the time to really ask for a promotion? So I think that the way it has impacted it is that all the tools are harder to use because the mediums in which you can use them in are very constricted. What do politics look like on Zoom? Well, are you using the chat window in Zoom or not? Do you think it's a good thing to pass a note in front of the boss? If you were in a real meeting in a room, you would never do that. Can you imagine everybody passing notes to each other while the boss is talking? I don't think so. But somehow in Zoom, it's okay to have a whole. It's okay, right? Yeah. So I think I think it's a stressor for people whose presence is not well developed. I think politically, it's a stressor for the level right below emerging talent. People who are not in their first job or even their second, but maybe their third, in their early 30s or late 20s, and they haven't really gotten their organizational sea legs under them. They don't know what not to say. They don't know what to say. They don't know how long to speak. They don't know what not to ask for, what to ask for, what's realistic, what isn't realistic. You pick up a lot in body language and interaction. That's data. That data is not available right now. So I think there's going to be a lot of clumsiness going forward. It would be my prediction.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's been a learning curve for everyone. And I'm just, curious as to how it's changed for us. And certainly it has, maybe to a certain extent, it's even perhaps reduced some of the politics in organizations because we have to be more direct and more on task.
Well, yes, but I would say think about Thanksgiving dinner. Like the politics in your family don't happen once a year around the Thanksgiving table.
Right.
They're happening all the time off scene. That's just the performance state that you're selling tickets for. Do you know what I mean? So I don't see why it would be different in any other place or sort of organized structure. Because there are conversations happening way off camera that you don't know about.
Yeah, of course.
You didn't know before, but you at least saw, who keeps going in and out of the office, and why has senior management all gone to the 27th floor? Or, there were signals. You could pick up signals. There are no signals now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the signal piece is really important. I'm curious from your perspective, what can organizations do to reduce the amount of politics that they have in their organization and create a better culture?
The first thing is just to accept it and that it's not a bad thing. It is bred in the bone of how people work. So I'd say step one, acceptance. Step two, take a look at your communities of people of color and women. And are they really being promoted or recognized in the way that you want to? Because chances are their skills at navigating the organization may not be quite as sharp because they don't really understand what all these unwritten rules are. I would certainly take a look at your competency model from the HR department. How are you evaluating and compensating these kind of skills? What do your incentive systems look like? Organizations that really want to change their culture and bring forth behaviors of well-being compensate for those. They incentivize those behaviors. So are you really doing that? So I think those are the places I would start. I'd be curious about the kind of culture you want. Is everybody a full participant in it? Do you walk the values you talk? And what are your compensation systems like? And then I start to have a series of critical conversations about how you're not achieving your business objectives. And why do you think, no matter how much you change, everything's so slow and people don't feel empowered and people are not engaged? What's getting in the way?
Perfect. That sounds great. Nancy, if our audience wants to learn more about you and the work that you are doing, where can they find you?
Well, please join me on LinkedIn. I post regularly. The Political IQ podcast is every week on iTunes. And my website is getpoliticaliq.com with some case studies and resources. And I'd love to hear from all your listeners.
Well, thank you so much. This was such a delight, and I can see why you have such impact with the clients with which you work. Thanks for being here, Nancy.
Thank you very much, Mari, for inviting me.